Everyone screams, it's a plot to drop the IQ. Fighting amongst each other over rumors that don't like you. Prefer us trapped in melancholy with the wood ones of holly. Suggestions that obliterate to camouflage the folly. Attempted mental robbery, executed sloppily. The hypocrisy, this mockery, and walk the talk with me. Put the hands up to touch the Akasha, cause you know deep down there's something bigger than your wallet.
Sweet eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful, friends. Welcome back to Rogue Soul, where tonight we're talking about the crowned and conquering child. This, of course, is the name of an aeon, according to Aleister Crowley. And so we're going to get into some of that. You know, the first time I heard about the crowned and conquering child, it seemed quite nefarious. And when you imagine a child being given power, it reminds you of sort of Game of Thrones, like Joffrey, right? Like just like the worst kind of narcissism, self-absorption, and psychopathy, really, right? Children are actually kind of famous for their sociopathy or psychopathy because they just don't know yet. And so, you know, you might see a child just walk up to a bug and just casually like stomp its life out. And it's not because they're psychopaths, right? It's because they're still unaware of their power and how it might affect, or, you know, what sort of compassion or empathy might be to some degree, right? To some degree, not so much with humans, but with things outside of, you know, children actually seem to have a high amount of empathy and compassion for other humans. We, you know, when they hear a baby crying, they might start crying too. And so we have this sort of thing built in, but it is also interesting, right? The narcissism and the psychopathy that might be sort of present in a child for various reasons, but isn't actually like a true characteristic of their soul. And yet when we think about the crowned and conquering child, as we'll get into tonight, you may sort of like highlight some of those more negative aspects in your mind. And I believe that's what a lot of people feel about this idea of the crowned and conquering child that Aleister Crowley put forth. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk a little bit about tradition as well and bring it all back together here for what we can do here and now to make our lives better and to understand ourselves in the world more deeply. And that's what we're always doing here at Rogue Soul through philosophy, literature, spirituality, and all sorts of things. So let's just get into it deeper now here with the crowned and conquering child. I'd like to invite you to roguesoul.org. It's the site. It's where everything I do is. You can book one-on-one sessions with me there. You can check out the books that I have written. The fictional trilogy is a fantastic read. It's a fantastic gift now that we're here at gift giving season as well. That's here under books. There's also the channeled source messages, also great books, a little bit deeper. So if you're not sure if someone's into pretty deep spirituality, then I wouldn't necessarily hand those over to them unless you're hoping to inspire them, and maybe that sticks, you know. But the books are great gifts. Again, you can schedule here with me one-on-one tarot readings, coaching and talk sessions, sound healing, all sorts of spiritual work with your spirit guides and allies, channeling, healing, tarot, and more. And you can give those as gifts as well. I would just suggest again that you know the person actually wants to receive that as a gift. Otherwise, it's not the greatest gift. And so it goes a little deeper than a lot of people might be ready for if they didn't choose it. You know what I mean? Not your average tarot, not your average spiritual healer over here. And then in the shop, there's also some great stuff if you're looking for gifts. Orgone makes such a great gift. This is cool too, because it doesn't actually matter if someone understands what it is or not. It will still uplift their space. So pretty cool. If they do, even better, you know, but it can do good wherever it's at. Orgone's a very powerful channeler of that high level energy. And so whether it's the lotus votive or a pillar, you can get a custom. So you can choose like the colors of the energies you know that person loves or needs more of. And that's all here in the shop as well. So get one of those for a gift. And the classes are here too. Right now, we're already halfway through the money package class, which you see here. So the next one will be for at least a handful of months. Next up is going to be the sound healing class. So I go through the cycle of heart-centered healer, money package, and then the sound healing class. None of them are, again, anything that you've ever seen anyone else doing or teaching. Completely unique and quite deep and quite powerful. So if you feel you're ready to step into some of those tools, those classes are there for you as well. This is all here at the site, roguesoul.org. Also, my writing is here at rogueways.substack.com. The most recent channeled message for paid supporters is 6-7, chaos or another opportunity for light. You may have heard of the 6-7 controversy, speeding through childhood, speeding through our children in the schools, and really interesting cultural phenomenon there. And so I just asked some guidance from spiritual ancestors about it. And so this is a channeled message from them. Anybody who's on my Substack as a paid supporter gets those channeled messages. Anyone who's not a paid supporter but is a free supporter, a free subscriber, gets all the other articles I write, all the updates about what's coming up, invitations to the events that I do, and a little preview of these channeled messages. So it's worth being a free subscriber. It's definitely worth being a paid subscriber. Thank you all for being subscribers at rogueways.substack.com. And so we'll start here in Reddit, of course, right? In Reddit. And this is our Thelema. So if you're wanting to learn more or talk to other people about Aleister Crowley and his whole thing about Thelema, then you could do it here in Reddit if you would like to. I steer clear of him. If we were going to put him in a lodge, he's at best in the Red Lodge, at best. I'm a fan of the White Lodge over here myself. So, Red, there's something we can gain, however, from anyone at any place and any time. And so that's true too, but I wouldn't give too much energy to this guy personally. But he's interesting, right? Of course, he's been called the beast. He's been called the wickedest man alive when he was alive. There's people I know who are, into paganism or witchcraft or that stuff, which again, I don't suggest and is not my bag. It's not my way. But they laugh at him. They're like, oh, people think he's like this big, powerful, evil guy. And he's just like kind of a doofus making fun of everybody, which I kind of get, right? When I do read little bits from him, that kind of shines through of this like mocking energy, right? Whatever he was, though, he was definitely involved in some pretty hefty stuff. And that's a whole show of its own, right? We could get into all of that sort of time period and the JPL and the, the sex magic and all this sort of NASA and stuff. It gets crazy, right? But for today's purposes, we'll just tap into a little Aleister Crowley here, the idea of the aeon of the child or the crown and conquering child. And this person says something that I was just talking with John Coleman. You may have heard it if you're on the podcast version of Rogue Ways. I didn't upload it to the video sites because the video wasn't super especially great, but the audio is nice. If you want to hear a conversation about the never-ending story, I've been uploading those to the podcast along with every episode I do here on video. And so you may have heard me talking in the most recent, the third and final installment of our never-ending story discussion about the crowned and conquering child. And part of what I was talking about was my interpretation of Aleister Crowley's crowned and conquering child age is this deep infantilization that we see in our society, and that I've never met many adults in my whole entire life. At thousands and thousands of people I've come across, I'm guessing maybe 3 of them were actually adults. Everyone else is a child in a big body, walking around with all kinds of garbage, narcissism, self-obsession, inability to think past their emotions, very childlike intellects. And so that's my interpretation of the crowned and conquering child, that the child is crowned and is conquered in our current moment of culture, and that's not good, right? And that it isn't a child king like Joffrey, right? It is instead our thwarted and unhealed inner child allowed to run rampant and ramshod in society, in culture, in our relationships, and in our own development. Sort of arrested development, one might say, for all of us, right? And even if you're doing your absolute best and you're like, you know what, I'm not going to be a child, I'm going to grow, I'm going to heal, you still may not have made it all that far because you're constrained by this culture that wants you so badly to be a child and also celebrates it. And also that's all you see. And those are all only role models we're given, and on and on and on. So it may be a bit difficult to be an adult in a world full of children. And so here's what this person says in the Thelema Reddit. He says, has anyone noticed how the description of the Aeon of the Child by Aleister Crowley in the intro to Liber AI, I guess, is so eerily accurate in regards to current events? The language is archaic, but the description is spot on. People becoming more and more epicene. The focus on media, sports, video games, and reality shows. Describing it all as soothing syrup for infants, no seed of purpose in them. And it's quite the observable phenomenon that adults are less and less in control of themselves. And in parentheses, they say Karens and Kyles. And act like spoiled, manipulative toddlers, despite being in their 40s, and talk like 18-year-old high schoolers, just as Crowley says, we are children. So that it summarizes it, right? Exactly what I'm talking about, exactly what I brought up in the episode, and exactly what maybe is exactly what he meant, right? He talked about a lot of different aspects of it. Whenever we're looking at the occult and esoteric, there's going to be 10 million takes on it, if not 8 billion, right? For one for each person. Like, what's your take? Just as valid as anyone else's, right? To some extent. And so who knows how many other interpretations there are of this. But one of the interpretations, of course, was that there really would be almost like an antichrist figure that was sort of like a crowned and conquering child. And, whatever that dredges up in your mind of what that might look like. But this, I think, is actually much more spot on. It's the sort of spirit of an age, right? The zeitgeist of an age. And in this age, at least since the 60s, right? And up here till now in 2025, people have been encouraged and maybe even controlled and manipulated to be less and less adult-like and more childlike, right? To let their responsibilities fly to the wind and go with whatever the moment is and play with their toys until you're 45 and play video games. I do too. I'm not criticizing anybody, right? I'm just pointing it out. Very infantilized. Like let's spend time playing games that are pointless, meaningless, empty to some degree, right? They're not productive. And instead of doing things like, I don't know, growing a garden, fixing your cars, right? Everyone used to fix their own car, right? Taking care of your house, repairing it, or just reading a book, writing a book, right? All kinds of things you could do to be much more adult, like much more active participant in your own development and growth. And instead, we're saturated with this stuff. You passively watch TV. All of the TV is infantilized. There's very little that's actually of a higher level thought, right? Higher thinking levels involved, higher, critiques and models of thinking involved. Very, very lame. I sometimes want to. I'm like, hey, you know what? I haven't watched. It's been like a decade since I've watched like a good, Bigfoot documentary or just something like that. That's like kind of fun and really intriguing. And then you go turn this stuff on, and it's like it's talking to a 4-year-old, right? They're like, oh, today on Bigfoot, but Nick's having a real hard time with like getting the Bigfoot thing going or whatever it is. And it's just like this really dumbed down, mentally incapacitated, pathos heavy, like deep in the emotional, poorly made toddler-like content. And it's almost all there is, right? And stuff, I like to think like my content or some of this, it's a lot less engaged with in general, because in general, not a lot of people are looking to learn how to think more clearly or to look at more, layered and deeper, nuanced aspects of culture, society, history, philosophy, and all of these things that I explore on the show here in Rogue Soul with you. You may have noticed in your life, there's not a lot of you, right, that are at your level. It's not an elite thing. We're not like better than other people, right? But it is different. It is not the norm, unfortunately, perhaps. And so, this person here just happens to sort of summarize that, what I'm thinking and saying about Crowley, pretty well, because they actually know him better than me too, which is nice. So use some of these terms that I wouldn't have been able to pull out. In Wikipedia, again, pretty safe to look at, Thelema and Aleister Crowley through this CIA asset here. But they talk about in the esoteric philosophy of Thelema, founded by Aleister Crowley in the early 20th century, an aeon is an astrological age. And this is AEON. I remember, when I channeled through my fictional novel, the first of the trilogy, Sine Curve of Aeons, I had not encountered the AEON before, but that was the title I was given, right? When you're channeling, you don't necessarily have a choice. And then I had, the first sort of like criticism I got about that title wasn't like, oh, this title is so long and so sort of deep that no one's even going to understand what it means, which is actually true. Almost nobody understands the title of the book, but even after reading it. which is an unfortunate thing. As an author, it's a disappointment, right? If you know, hey, satisfy me by commenting below. I'll love it. But anyway, I hadn't encountered this, right? And the first criticism I received was from this Gnostic who's a really pedantic and very fundamentalist, has a very twisted, in my view, view of Gnosticism. And they said, "Oh, your aeons, like the, like the gods." Like, no, not really. And they're like, "Well, that's what that means." Like, well, it's not. Like, yeah, it is. Well, really, it's not actually. And this is actually what an aeon is. It's an age. It's an age sort of beyond human ken almost, right? Like, how many thousands of years is in this age? It could be 24,000, right? It could be a slice of that precession of the equinoctial pie. It could be 100. But really, it's more likely to be many, many thousands, right? And so an aeon is this vast amount of time. And in each of these aeons, there's some sort of flavor, some sort of defining sort of characteristic. And for me, it's always about consciousness and human consciousness and what humans are doing with that consciousness that determines the age and the flavor of the age. It's handy to look at it astrologically. It's handy to look at it through the precession of the equinoxes and say, for example, right now we're in the age of Pisces, and we're moving into the age of Aquarius because it moves backwards, right? The precession of the equinoxes. And so we're moving into the age of Aquarius. We still have some time to go. I know a lot of people think we're already there. Cool, whatever you want to think, but we're not in my accounting. We're headed there. We're not there yet. And so we're still in Pisces. So those are helpful ways to determine an age. But this is another sort of way of determining flavors of ages, or maybe even flavors of sort of like sub ages, like within the larger equinoctial, precessional pie, perhaps within the age of Pisces, there's other ages, coming in and out. And maybe this sort of aeon of the crown and conquering child is one of those in the age of Pisces, for example. So you're allowed to think of it however you like, whatever makes more sense to you, whatever you seem to find more evidence of in your own experience. And for me, that seems to be what's going on. I compare this as well to, and we've talked about on the show before, Rudolf Steiner's view of these sort of ages, or these sort of flavors or zeitgeists of the ages. And he talks about the sort of age of the presence of Lucifer and Satan. And now we're either in or heading into the age of Ahriman. And these are sort of for him, it was more like those that like a problem to get through, right? I'm not thinking of the right word, the adversarial energy that we're transmuting and transforming as we move through the age. So there's another way of thinking about it, right? And so we're perhaps in those ages. It's interesting how they overlap too. It's interesting how, little Luciferian, little Ahrimanic energy can be compared to this age of a crowned and conquering child, right? Where our innermost sort of like failures that are very immature, right? Like self-obsession and narcissism and sociopathy and psychopathy. Like I said, those are very, sort of like immature aspects of an unhealed, ungrown self. And then there's perhaps very childlike, right? And not in the good way. There's a lot of really great things about remaining childlike your whole life. And those aren't them, right? So there's some overlap in these ideas and in various different sort of philosophies and schools of thought as well. So we define these as spiritual and culturally distinct when their characteristics, each accompanied by its forms of magical and religious expression. So another way of saying that, again, this is Crowley's way, but I would say, just as I already did, not magical and religious expressions, but consciousness. Same difference, right? Same difference. Our consciousness is our magic. It is our religion. It is what we're doing. It's our philosophy. That's what it is, right? So these are just different words for the same thing, in my opinion. Thelemites, followers of Crowley, believe that the great year of human history is divided into a series of these aeons, each governed by a particular deity or archetype that embodies the spiritual formula. The first of these was the Aeon of Isis, associated with prehistory. That'd be a really long age. Again, this is where I'm like, he's not as perhaps informed as maybe he could have been, or he's misleading people intentionally. I'm not sure. But prehistory can go through millions of years. Because what we're really saying is before about 12,000 years ago, right? To which we have like no real record or real idea of exactly what happened, because there's cataclysms and there's weird anomalies and we're just not sure. Is it Tartaria? Is it Mud Flood? Is it Atlantis? Is it Mu? Is it Lemuria? I mean, maybe all in the above, right? And again, evidence of advanced humanity goes back even to millions of years ago. So how long? I don't know, right? So he's putting all of that in Isis, whatever. He says that's when humanity revered a great goddess symbolized by the ancient Egyptian deity Isis. And he's not necessarily saying that all of humanity worshipped Isis. He's saying all of humanity was in this goddess mentality or consciousness, right? Their magic and their religion revolved around the goddess. That's not incorrect. There's definitely a period of time, right? And so that's how he's representing that period of time. This was followed, he says, by the Aeon of Osiris, spanning the classical and medieval periods during which the worship of a singular male god, represented by Osiris, dominated. Again, not necessarily that it was Osiris, but that it was the singular masculine perception of God. So the God of the Bible, the God of all of these other Abrahamic religions, perceived as a masculine being, right? And so that's represented here by Osiris. And patriarchal values. He says the current Aeon, however, known as the Aeon of Horus, is believed to have begun in 1904 with the reception of the Book of the Law, Liber Al, not AI, which Crowley maintained was dictated to him by a preter-human intelligence named Iwas. So, this is why he's looked at as like a channeler of demons and, untruths. And, he's looked at as the beast, and he did blood magic and sex magic. And so, this is why there's a lot of darkness and mistrust of this. And I would also mistrust this and not put a lot of faith in what he brought through because of those things. So 1904 to now, he's saying this intelligence channeled through and told him that, and that this is the age of Horus. It says the Aeon of Horus, frequently referred to as simply the Aeon, because if you're a follower of Thelema, we're in that Aeon now, right? So it is the Aeon. And symbolized by the child god Horus. And Horus is actually so many things. Horus is represented in so many ways. If you actually go study this, like, being the child of Ra and whatnot is one of them, but also many other aspects of Horus exist. So it's true of a lot of the pantheon of gods in various traditions, but Egyptians, or even I'd say more so, have a lot of different subtle takes on a lot of these energies. So to say he's a child god is a very, very, very diminishing to what all of the significance of Horus. But anyways, again, just to represent this child and this childlike energy that is in this age, Horus will be the representative for Crowley's age. Is seen as a time of greater consciousness, individual sovereignty, and spiritual awakening. And that's also true. As we move forward, we tend to do that. But you could have, for example, said that going from the age of Isis to Osiris, as they're counting it, or the age of Leo into Pisces, if that's what's next. I can't remember. For example, whatever age to age, you could always say that. So it's a little vague. But I think we all maybe also feel that right about now. Greater consciousness, individual sovereignty, spiritual awakening, and that these are the things that are actually happening. And that is true. That is true. The Elamites believe that this Aeon represents a departure from the constraints and dogmas of the previous Aeon, particularly the influence of the Abrahamic religions, and heralds an era of self-actualization and the realization of human potential. Again, this is also being described by all kinds of people. It has been throughout the New Age sort of movement. I never have aligned with the New Age, and yet when I get into my own experience, this is also what comes through for me about this time. That we're doing this self-actualization, self-realization, and that human consciousness will be much higher than it has ever been. And that will automatically kind of depart from some of the constraints and dogmas that we previously held. It's just kind of implied, again, in any time that you're awakening or raising in consciousness. So none of this so far is all of that controversial. It's definitely not negative. But with Thelema, it says each Aeon is characterized by its own specific magical formula, which is fundamental to the practice and understanding of Thelemic magic. The transition between these Aeons is understood not merely as a change in religious or cultural practice, but as a profound shift in the underlying spiritual paradigm that governs human existence. So if you're a follower of Thelema, you're doing very specific magical rites in order to support your own growth, or maybe even the collective growth through this Aeon. To go deeper into it, He says this aeon emphasizes self-realization, individualism, and the pursuit of one's true will, symbolized by the child god Horus representing new beginning and potential growth. Crowley described it as a time of the crowned and conquering child, focusing on spiritual awakening and personal freedom. He also stated every man and every woman is a star, highlighting the unique and divine nature of each individual. It's also been said that this, next time Christ consciousness returns to incarnate on earth, that it will be all humans, or at least a much larger number of humans, not just one avatar, right? Channeling through this consciousness. So, that might also resonate with some of what he's saying here. But it's interesting too, however he talks about it, I don't know. But what is often true is that anytime we're moving through into higher consciousness, into healing, into higher awareness, we are tearing apart and tearing down our past self. And in doing so, we often revert a little bit or regress a little bit, or we often lash out, or we'll just be in our darkness for a second. I'm not talking about darkness as an evil thing. I'm talking about it as your own personal shadow. Right? When you're growing into the light of awareness of your truest self, you're going to see some gunk. You might respond poorly for a second. And so as we transform, we often see a bit of chaos, a bit of darkness, a bit of this sort of opposite of what we're actually moving towards. Right? So we're sort of like taking the two polarities and we're just kind of like going to an extremes, and before we balance out and move forward is another way of thinking about it. And so if we are going into this rebirth as sort of, children, but children of like the highest consciousness, where we're finally just beginning to actually understand ourselves truly as individuals, and therefore how that affects the collective, and that we're all kind of doing this together. If we're doing that, then yeah, we probably on the way will see a lot of people going into the worst aspects of their immaturity and trying to really actually even hang on to that. Because you also see this, right? Whenever people are growing or moving forward, take, for example, you're quitting alcohol or something, you're going to like clutch onto it. You'll be like, okay, well, before I quit, I'm going to drink like 12 gallons really quick. Right? You go like way deeper into it sometimes before you come out the other side. And so this may be part of why we're seeing such infantilization and such deep childishness on such a profound level all throughout our society and culture. And it is to move into true will, to move into true awareness, true consciousness. You do have to burn all that dross off. You've got to get all of that old gunk, and you've got to get it up and out. So not everyone does have to clutch the bottle and chug it down before they quit, right? Not everyone has to do that, but a lot of people will. It's a very common reaction and response before growth, right? So anyways, we'll move on from this. This is just coming up next, by the way, is the Aeon of Maat, which just means truth. I'm down for that. Like, let's get there. Let's definitely get there. Some people say that's already started, or that there's overlap. There's like kind of the remnants of the age of the crowned and conquering child and the beginnings of the age of Maat. And, that is also how it would go once you let go of that immaturity and you burn off that dross. You're like, aha, oh, the truth is here. Now I really see myself, right? And this is all internal, but obviously it affects the collective deeply because we're all here together. So, we do have this infantilization of Western culture. It's, and many people have said, this is intentional. This is to destroy us. This is to keep us from seizing back our own power, self-responsibility. If we are talking about the age of the crowned and conquering child, that is actually the goal, is to have self-realization, have individuation, have sovereignty, right? And so perhaps the forces that ought not be, or the forces that are always the adversary, whether it's Luciferian or satanic or Ahrimanic or however you want to categorize it, or even just your own inertia, right? Of like all your history and your ancestry and your choices and your habits, whatever those are, something wants to keep you there. And sometimes it's you that wants to keep you there. You're like, I'm comfortable here. I know what to expect here. I'm not the happiest I could be here. I don't know everything I could know here. I don't have all the highest truth here, but I am comfortable, right? And this comfortability is like a trap. We've talked about that many times. It's cool to be comfortable. I like being comfortable. And if you've had a life of chaos and trauma, like, please get comfort. I'm just saying, also look at how some types of comfort are deceiving. Right? Some types of comfort are very deceiving. This is when we talk about pushing ourselves beyond our comfort zone, etc. So this article here on theconversation.com says, if you regularly watch TV, you've probably seen Cartoon Bear pitching you toilet paper, a gecko with a British accent selling you auto insurance, and a bunny in sunglasses promoting batteries. This has always struck me as a bit odd. Sure, it makes sense to use a cartoon character to sell products to kids, but why are advertisers using the same technique on adults? To me, it's just one symptom of a broader trend of infantilization in Western culture. It began before the advent of smartphones and social media, but as I argue in my book, The Terminal Self, our everyday interactions with these computer technologies have accelerated and normalized our culture's infantile tendencies. They're not wrong. So this is why I said there's some overlap with the Ahrimanic, if you've studied that in Rudolf Steiner, and this idea of this, crown and conquering child, and the negative aspects of that are holding people back from their breakthrough, because technology does exacerbate. And Ahrimanic energies are very technological. Luciferian energies are very technological as well. So a little bit of both, right? And they're elusively pulling you into this sense of satisfaction and comfort that doesn't even really exist. Right? You're like, oh, I did something today. I argued with a stranger about the rights of abortion or whatever, and you did nothing. You may have even only been talking to literally a bot, right? But you got some weird sense of satisfaction. And it's not even real, right? So we're not only in this encouraged to be even more childlike in this technological age, but it is again stopping us from moving forward if we're allowing ourselves to be distracted by it. Right? We're putting ourselves in this state of arrested development. And, to rely on something other than yourself to some degree will always keep you immature, right? To rely on these technologies to do whatever it is for you will always keep you immature. And, if you're utilizing a tool to self and do what you're choosing, it's a different sort of thing, right? That's more like using a lawnmower or a scythe to cut down the wheat or whatever. But if you're just saying do this for me, fulfill me in this way, and you're relying on that, expecting that, it's keeping you stagnant, right? So it says, the dictionary defines infantilizing as treating someone as a child or in a way that denies their maturity in age or experience. What's considered age appropriate or mature is obviously quite relative, but most societies and cultures will deem behaviors appropriate for some ages and not others. As the Bible puts it in Corinthians 13:11, when I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put childish ways behind me. Some psychologists will be quick to note that not everyone puts their childish ways behind them. You can become fixated at a particular stage of development and fail to reach an age-appropriate level of maturity. When facing unmanageable stress or trauma, you can even regress to a previous stage of development. And psychologist Abraham Maslow has suggested that spontaneous childlike behaviors in adults aren't inherently problematic. But some cultural practices today routinely infantilize large swaths of the population. So they're not wrong, right? All those things are true. And so again, it also can be perhaps therapeutic for you if you kind of were robbed of a childhood to do things now that you wished you could have done when you were a child, right? Maybe you're going to Disneyland, God forbid, and or just something that it just feels fulfilling. It can be good to give yourself some things like that. And besides that, though, your behavior, the way you approach yourself, the way you treat others, right? What you choose to focus on in order to grow towards goals. These sorts of things should be adult-like, even if you have some of those moments where it is maybe appropriate to be a little bit more childlike in those ways. And this also, by the way, doesn't mean you can't be a silly goose. Be a silly goose. Silly goose is good for your whole being. Right? Being a silly goose is you're laughing and you're playing, you're being a dork and you're being nonsense or whatever, and you're singing songs about nothing and goofing around with someone. That's great. But that's different than some of these things that sort of keep you locked in immature levels of self. It says, we see it in our everyday speech. We refer to grown women as girls, how we treat senior citizens when we place them in adult care centers where they're forced to surrender their autonomy and privacy, and in the way school personnel and parents treat teenagers, refusing to acknowledge their intelligence and need for autonomy, restricting their freedom, and limiting their ability to enter the workforce. Can entire societies succumb to infantilization? So I talk about this a lot when I was a teacher too, and people would be shocked. I don't know why. They're so shocked at the kids that I could reach, the kids that were successful in my class when they had never had been in anyone else's class. And all of them were like, what are you doing? How do you do it? And I'm like, I don't even know how to explain to you that literally all I'm doing is treating them like a human being, right? And what you do is treat them like a child, and they're not children. I mean, they are, right? I'm not exposing them to like horrible content or something, right? But like when you talk to a kid, you just talk to them exactly like you would talk to an adult. That's what they need and what they want. But that's not what people are doing. So kids would naturally gravitate towards me because they liked the respect that they got from me, right? And I had firm boundaries. They were scared of me and kind of hated me sometimes too, because I wouldn't let them get away with shit. But I also always respected them and treated them like they were an adult, and they loved that. They don't even have words for it, and they love it, right? The other teachers have no idea what I'm talking about, but they can tell that it works. And here we are. This is actually a cultural problem that in all schools, everywhere, as far as I can tell, this is how we treat children, is like they are stupid, incapable, like they need to be babied through things, like we can't let them encounter life. We have to hide them from it, shelter them from it. And so we create adults, we create little children in adult bodies. We have encouraged them to remain infantilized. So I love this interview or this article because they nail that. Adults' failure to reach emotional, social, or cognitive maturity is not due to individual shortcomings. It's socially engineered, this person says. So, they talk about how a lot of this crept in over time, where we started to expect less from people. We have less standards, right? We think it's unfair to have standards for people. We think that we have to baby everybody. We think that nobody can experience pain or suffering of any kind. And if they do, we've failed them. We have this sort of therapy culture they talk about, where we treat adults as vulnerable, weak, and fragile. And this is not the right way to therapize, therapeutically enhance or heal ourselves. And that there's all of these things. And so it's in our media, like they pointed out at the beginning. It's in our education, right? It's in the way we treat each other. It's in the rules we make about society. And it's in the dropping of standards. But this person also ties it into this high-tech pacifiers they talk about, right? We get overwhelmed with life. And so we get on our smartphone and we play Candy Crush, right? We get obsessed with it, addicted to it. And, then we go home, we play a different video game. Then we watch movies and, shows that are all infantilizing adults too, and showing adults as infantilized, incapable, stupid, right? Emotionally immature. We're encouraging it. We're celebrating it. We're reinforcing it. We're putting it up as like an idol to emulate, right? And people just don't take responsibility, and more we're relying on things, and we're just giving away our data, we're giving away our autonomy, we're giving away our sovereignty, we're giving away our entire society to these electronics and this potential electronic prison. And it takes a childlike intellect to be able to do that and not see it coming. It takes a childlike reliance and lack of self-responsibility and awareness to not take control back, right? And so we do need to get back to maturity, patience, empathy, solidarity, humility, commitment to a project greater than oneself. And these are the things that this author highlights that I would definitely agree with. I would add to it standards and self-responsibility. And that those are the things that will bring us back to maturity, actual maturity, not being a child in a big body, but being an adult in a big body, right? Acting like it. Doesn't mean you have to be perfect. Doesn't mean you never have fun. It just means that you take this seriously. You take life seriously and yourself seriously, right? You can have lots of fun doing that. And as I often have argued and said to you, that's actually more freedom than you've ever had once you get there. When you're falling into all these other, immature, unhealed, wounded, reactive, low vibration sorts of ways of being, you are damning yourself. You have no options anymore except to continue acting in that vein. You get more and more trapped and pigeonholed. You have more and more you would have to undo in order to get back to something else. But when you take responsibility on, when you take responsibility for yourself, all of a sudden, all the opportunities open up. All of them. So pretty good article there from theconversation.com by Elantseva Marina, as far as I can tell. So you can check that out if you want. We also see here on yourtango.com, I don't even know what this is. America has a terrifying infantilization problem no one was talking about. A society with no consequences or risks is a sitting duck. So this gets back to some of the things I was sort of teasing out that the last author didn't necessarily hit on as strongly, which is that we need consequences, which is another way of saying we need standards, right? You wouldn't have a consequence unless the standard was broken. So you have standards. It's implied in the consequences part, and also the risks thing, right? When I was saying we're like buffering children from having a real experience of life, and we think we're protecting them, but when you don't have risk, you don't have growth and you don't have maturity. So you don't become an adult. So this author taps into a few more of those sorts of aspects of this crowned and conquering child age that we may be in. And it says, lately I've been noticing something happen between my groups of friends. There's a very stark divide between two main categories of my friends, those who chose to grow up and those who haven't. I like the emphasis there. It's a choice, right? It says, I'm 36. I've lived on my own. I've started my own business. My husband's 27, has his own business along with a 9-to-5 job. When I'm not working, I'm fixing things around my new place or parenting. In other words, I'm an adult. I function as an adult. So does my husband. And while we've had to rely on family members due to circumstances out of our control, we're still doing the adult thing. The same cannot be said for a sizable group of our friends I've already written about. I've also seen countless other men and women, all of whom have various stages of arrested development. It says kids aren't as mature as they were at my age. The more I talk to other parents, the more I realize something is wrong with Gen Alpha. And I believe that's the generation after Z. I think we're in, like, if you're a child right now, you're Alpha. So simply put, the milestones my friends and I reached aren't being reached at that age anymore. I've talked about this with you guys before as well, right? And you may have noticed it if you know children or have children. The one that struck me before I left teaching, and that was almost 10 years ago now, was that kids weren't getting their driver's license. They weren't interested in it. They could have done it, and they chose not to because they didn't want to. And it blew my freaking mind. It was everything opposite from what we couldn't wait to get our license, and just you could drive anywhere in the world you want. And really, you're probably just going to go 2 miles away to the store, but it's so cool to be self-reliant, self-responsible, and have that freedom, right? Again, responsibility is actually freedom. They don't want that freedom. They wanted to stay and they wanted to rely on others and they wanted to be taken care of. And so they didn't get it. It was scary to them to get their license. So I see exactly what this author is talking about. You may have seen it too. During a conversation with my friends who had 2 kids, I was taken aback when I heard that my friends' kids are not allowed to use a microwave or a stovetop at 10 years old. When I heard that, I looked at my friends and asked, why can't they cook? They're old enough. And my friends shrugged and said, I just don't think they're ready yet. The cooking incident was far from the only one. Kids these days are developing slower than any other generation before. Even the earliest milestones are getting delayed. Cooking and cleaning aside, research from 2018 shows that parents are potty training their children later and later. Most children used to be fully toilet trained at 12 to 18 months, but that age has swelled to 3 years old. I remembered seeing a disclaimer at a kindergarten that said students are required to be toilet trained. I was shocked because a child who wasn't toilet trained in preschool was a rarity. When I was a child, it would get you bullied. Yeah, I personally don't think anybody wasn't potty trained by the time I was in preschool. That's kind of shocking to me. And I mean, this might be its own thing. We maybe could separate that one out because I know there's some different understandings now of like the potential trauma if you force a kid to use a toilet. But I'll say you can, and this is a cool way to do it if you didn't know. My sister did this with my nephew, where she would just hold him on the toilet and play with him over the toilet, even when he was like 3 months old, 4 months old, 5 months old, 6 months old, all the way through, so that by the time, the time came, he was very friendly with the toilet and had good positive associations with it. So it was easy to get him to use it. Other people have kids like color on the toilet or paint the toilet to make it something they feel very comfortable with. And it may sound very silly to some of us, but it's actually makes so much sense. So, that aside, they're not wrong about this. Delayed adulthood, delayed maturity, delayed adulthood. Sorry, I just said that already. But anyways, it says, when I was younger, I was the one who was delayed. I wasn't allowed to go out unsupervised until I was almost 15. The only exception would be my time at the mall, and that's because it was indoors. Today, some people are 18 years of age who still have curfews or are straight up banned from going outside without a parent's permission. That is alarming. It goes beyond hover parenting. It says that delayed milestones are just the proverbial tip of the iceberg. Does anyone else know people who always seem to be bailed out by their parents, or adults who still don't know how to do laundry or file taxes? If you've been in the dating scene, you also probably hear 30-year-old men who insist that they're too young to settle down, as if their 3 decades is not enough time to figure out what they want. What's funny is that most people who behave this way know they aren't acting like adults. They have to be. I've heard so many adults brush off their inability to be functioning adults with a giggle and an, oh, I can't adult today, hee hee. But it's not a laughing matter. It's scary. I'm with you. When I hear people talk like that, I'm like, you are an adult, though. It doesn't matter if you want to be or not. You have to get your shit together. You have to. I was baffled when I met people who were just 17, 18, not even out of the house yet, and didn't know how to do their laundry. I was like, what universe are you from? I started doing laundry when I was 10 because we had to help out or else nothing would get done. There was no chore I didn't know how to do by the time I was 12. I was able to do it all: cook, clean, laundry. I wasn't burdened by that. It was easy. It's easy to do. Kids like to be responsible if you help them do it. It's crazy to me. So to get all the way to 18 and not have some of these basic skills is mind-blowing. They go on to say, America's breeding a country of mass arrested development. Did you ever see those TikToks of Chinese kindergartners? They're insane. And yet they were doing things I did as a kid. These TikToks show children as young as 5 learning foreign languages, cooking food, sewing, and playing war games. Dude, it's true. It's not just China. It is any child you want to have bigger experiences will do it. All you have to do is have them join you in it. You're like, hey, do you want to learn to mow the lawn? Here's a safe little child's lawnmower. And you just look, I do this, you do this. And then by the time they're 10, they're mowing the lawn, right? Or whatever else it is you want. Cooking, cleaning, it doesn't matter. And kids like to do it. You're not helping them by not letting them do it. In America, teachers pretty much beg kids that age to color in the lines. Nowadays, they also have to beg parents to potty train their kids. It's no secret that a scary number of American teens and young adults are lagging in social skills, reading, math, and even the most basic life skills. A lot of the people who just graduated college will not be able to handle a typical workplace. That's why I know so many people in their mid to late 30s who never moved out of their homes. They can't hold a job. Oh, it gets worse and worse all the time. We have less and less standards, more and more babying, less and less expectations. And here's what we get for it, right? The crowned and conquering child. When their parents die or move to a retirement home, these individuals will be completely, entirely, and utterly unprepared. And when this starts happening en masse, it will turn America's culture upside down. And they're not wrong, and it'd be interesting if we do have something like the sort of matrix, plug into this and just be asleep forever in your virtual world. If that becomes an opportunity, these are the people who are going to choose it. And it's not up to me, and I'm going to try not to judge, but you get to do whatever you want in this body, in this life. But oh my God, because that's basically what you're already living in, is this like non-real place where you have no expectations and no responsibilities and get to essentially do whatever you want, but not really, because there's so much that isn't open to you because you can't even function, right? You feel like that's freedom. It's not. It's a trap. What happened to cause the terrifying infantilization problem? America's culture is a perfect storm of factors that encourage and incentivize people to act like overgrown brats. Let me explain. And I'll just summarize here. They go into scaredy parents. So that's that buffering we talked about, that not letting kids or people have real experiences of life and pain and loss and hardship. Weaponized incompetence. And this is, in the classroom especially, I was calling this out from my first year teaching, and it only got worse every single year, that when we have a lack of expectations and a lack of standards and we can't hold anyone accountable, then we will make weaponized incompetence. Like no one will be capable of anything. And that's what we've done. We're creating this culture on purpose. No consequences is a very similar thing, if not the same thing, as I said. And then they just kind of close out here saying, a society made exclusively of children is a broken society. It cannot function when 70% of its population acts like teenagers. And that's sort of end here. It says, what truly scares me about our society is that we're seeing people develop later and later, and we're not sounding alarm bells, but we should, because this will become a serious problem in about 10 years from now. It's already a serious problem. It's already a place where people can't find reliable work, where their mind is blown if they find someone who can actually do the job, to be able to function as a society like this isn't really possible. So we're already encountering the very negative side effects of this crowned and conquering child age, right? Where technology or the Ahrimanic, the Luciferian, the Satanic are all kind of here together, holding everyone back from true self-responsibility, self-awareness, individuation, and higher consciousness. So, the only part I want to tap into on this one, this is from medium.com. Victoria Zade Castillo wrote this for their graduate thesis. And it's growing infantilization in the United States, the possible dystopian reality. And the thing I wanted to pull out from this was that she taps into George Orwell's 1984. And most of us are quite familiar with 1984. Almost everyone was forced to read it in high school. Maybe you also read it of your own volition. I loved it in high school, and I love it today. And I find it to be a very fascinating book, especially the unabridged version, which is not what most people have read, but you can check that out on your own. There's a lot cut out of the abridged version. And in 1984, we have this dystopian society. And actually, what George Orwell may not have intended, but is true, is that he has encapsulated perfectly the crowned and conquering child. Right? Everybody in this society, if you remember, is completely controlled in every way, and they have no freedom at all. And that, again, is the sort of worst aspects of the child, the inverted sort of child energy, right? Where you're controlled by the parent, you have no responsibility, you have, technically they have expectations. Like he even has to get up and like do exercises in front of the telescreen. And if he doesn't, it, calls him out and berates him because it's watching him all the time, as it's watching everyone all the time. But there's not really expectations, right? Like you're not really supposed to do a very good job. You're not really supposed to think very hard. You're not supposed to try very hard. And people who do stand out, and then they're like hit down, right? And they want everyone to just sort of barely do what they're expected and don't go outside the boundaries, but just sort of like coast along, right? So you see all of these people who aren't passionate about anything, don't care about anything, pretend to be excited about Big Brother and hate week and all of these things socially, but actually are just slowly dying inside and terrified all the time. We see it also, especially if you remember the children of the neighbor guy are just a nightmare. And they're like looking all the time for how they can turn their parents in for double think or, crime think and hate think or whatever. And Winston too. So Winston's just like, oh God, the kids are a terror. And that's the crowned and conquering child too, right? Which is like this exacerbation of the narcissistic, psychopathic, abuse of power, right? And all of that sort of stuff. So 1984 definitely taps into the crowned and conquering child for sure. Like the worst possible extension of it, if it never heals, right, is 1984. It is this dystopia, fully reliant on the state. All your marching orders, every object you receive comes from the state. You have no autonomy, no sovereignty, no self-identity, nothing, right? It is the epitome of it. But she also taps into how this is, about censorship. And in 1984, it's very focused on language. It's very focused on removing language from people so that they cannot speak or think correctly. And that's a type of infantilization too. And so that's a type of censorship. There's a lot of censorship in 1984. It's one of the main things people focus on when they talk about the book, but they don't really point out the infantilization of it, right? And so we're just sort of drawing that out of that text, and that's what she does in this article on medium.com. And that ties into where I want to take things in a moment. But we also see that now, right? Have you not heard or seen people who are glad for the censorship of the current or recent regimes in the United States and now around the world? It's this hot take, right? That we're going to censor social media, that if you say certain things, we're going to jail you. And these things, by the way, are very non-issues. Like someone the other day was jailed in Germany, I believe, or the UK maybe, because they called politicians parasites. In general, they said politicians are parasites. and they got all their electronics taken away and they're imprisoned and fined. This is the type of censorship we're living in right now. And luckily in the United States, we have actually a lot less of it. But for a few years there, especially under the Biden administration, we had all kinds of censorship. Social media, you weren't allowed to talk about certain things. Certain words got you banned instantly. People like me who are content creators got their channels taken down left and right. So, and we saw people celebrating this. Oh, you should censor because I need to be kept safe from these people who are liars or manipulators or, not true or whatever. And even if they were, it's not anyone's job to keep you safe from that. That's infantilization. So when you celebrate your own censorship, now you're really into the infantilization, the crown and conquering child, right? Pretty deeply in the inverted sense, at least. So talking about, political correctness and how words are, censored now and how we're in this age where, equality and feminism and all of this stuff has been used to sort of actually oppress and censor people and infantilize one another. And the government's supposed to keep us safe from mean words and mean ideas and how infantilizing this is. And she ties that all back to 1984 and how we get to see where this leads, right? If we're going to be this infantilized, this is where it leads. And we didn't used to be this way. You used to be a nation of adults. We used to be a culture of adults. And sure, maybe it was patriarchal, right? As Crowley said, that age was, Osiris, and as he called it, and it was all about the patriarchy and the male god and this sort of masculine leadership and all of that. And yeah, maybe. And also people were adults. So you can criticize some of the negative and you can take some of the positive though and keep it. And here we are in full sort of rejection and opposition to adulthood. And our tradition is adulthood actually, but we're disconnected from it. We have been like chopped at the root and we don't have that anymore. We don't have role models who represent it and we've lost it. And this is actually a part of 1984 that I have never heard anybody else talk about. And for as far as I know, I'm the only person who's gone down this path. And I've been talking about it since I taught it because this is how I taught 1984, right? All the same themes we just talked about, of course, but those are easy. It's easy to get to those in the first few chapters. And so eventually it's a long book. You got to get other stuff, right? For me, at least, if you want kids to actually be continuing to learn and grow. And so I brought in this thread here I'm going to share with you. This just was published on my Substack today. It's for all subscribers. So even if you're a free subscriber on rogueways.substack.com, you get full access to articles like this. And you can go there right now and read it yourself. It's called Underneath the Spreading Chestnut Tree. I said, I loved you and you loved me, but did we love each other enough to overcome our deepest failures and triumph against evil? In the context of this conversation, we could say, did we love each other enough to overcome our childlike resistance to growing up and triumph against our own failures, right? That's how we can kind of reread that. So I talk about 1984's Chestnuts. I say the bleak and totalitarian future dystopia meticulously held up to the dying light of human foresight that is 1984 by George Orwell is taught in nearly every school, held as a deterrent to every communist sympathizer, and analyzed by every literary noob in history. And yet I've never seen anyone share what I'm about to share with you. When I taught the book semester after semester, I became intimately familiar with more than just the common tropes and narratives. Themes and character analyses and philosophical takes on economics, politics, and sociology. When I read something over and over, I can't help but continue to pick apart every detail. The most obvious symbol in the entire book is the one least picked apart and analyzed, however, and that is the chestnut tree. Spoiler alert. When Winston is finally broken by the party, his idol and confidant representing Big Brother, and by the deepest fears within his own heart and mind, we find him afterwards sitting at the Chestnut Tree Cafe, a place for disgraced party members. This is not the first time we encounter the Chestnut Tree Cafe. I'll pause here and I'll point out, if you remember in the book, Winston, part of what cracks him is that they put rats on his face, and that's his deepest fear. And here's another aspect of that infantilization, because as an adult, even if you're scared of something, you can do it anyway, right? A child can't. A child might like give in and just, they don't get it yet, or they haven't practiced enough yet, right? But as an adult, even your deepest fears, you can confront and move through. That's a very adult thing to do, right? So here's another level of infantilization that was actually Winston's undoing. If Winston was a real adult, then this wouldn't have happened. But he's not. He's infantilized and happy to be to some degree. He doesn't do a lot to change it, at least. I'm very critical of Winston as a character. So at the Chestnut Tree Cafe he is, and we've seen it, we've heard the song as it is told in the book, I sold you and you sold me underneath the spreading chestnut tree. And so we hear, or we hear that this song exists. We hear those lyrics in the book earlier on. We also see that it's this place where our disgraced party members or broken party members go when they're out of favor. They've fallen from status. It's bleak. It's filled with telescreens. It represents conformity and defeat, which is another childlike thing to do. Winston sits alone in the chestnut tree at the end, the Chestnut Tree Cafe, and he's reflecting on his betrayal of Julia, which is supposedly like his love, right? He's betrayed. The song plays again, I sold you and you sold me. We hear that refrain again. And he's finally accepted the party's control. He's finally given in fully to being a eternally infantilized, broken being. Curiosity, I say, drove me to ask whether or not there really existed in George Orwell's world a song about a chestnut tree. Is this a real song, right? In other words, is what I wanted to know. So I looked up the lyrics, chestnut tree, I sold you and you sold me. And it turned out a song popped up. And there was a song, and actually was really popular at Orwell's time. Very popular. The whole world would have perhaps known, I should say the whole Western or civilized world would have known this song. But none in my generation or the generation preceding me has ever heard it. So this song was so popular just 100 years ago that everyone would have known it, but I've never heard it. My mom and dad never heard it. It's potentially possible my grandmother heard it, I say, right? She could have been dancing to it, in fact, in her youth, dancing to this song that everybody loved, this big band, this orchestral song, and I wouldn't know because we've been so divorced from our roots, right? Which again is very childlike. When you become an adult in other cultures and other societies and in our own history, you adopt from your parents and your grandparents the views, the histories, right? The cultures, the traditions, how you bake, how you interact with people, all of this passes down. Well, that stopped. And again, about the 60s onward, at least, we stopped. We rejected all of it. We gave it away and we just went for it on our own, right? And this is, again, what Crowley actually describes as we've rejected the past and we're going into this age of the crowned and conquering child. So this is what we did to ourselves when we rejected all of this, is we lost things like this gem of a song, which is actually now one of my favorite songs. I mean, my students listen to it over and over again and, you know, take parts of it, make arguments about it, because it's so interesting that this real song existed and that this was the song that George Orwell twisted into an inverted version of itself. Because in the song, instead of underneath the spreading chestnut tree, I sold you and you sold me, right? Instead of that, it says, underneath the spreading chestnut tree, I loved him and he loved me. There I used to sit up on his knee neath the spreading chestnut tree. There beneath the boughs we used to meet. All his kisses were so sweet. All the little birdies went tweet, tweet neath the spreading chestnut tree. I said, I love you, and there ain't no ifs or buts. He said, I love you, and the blacksmith shouted, Chestnut. Underneath the spreading chestnut tree, there he said he'd marry me. Now you ought to see our family neath the spreading chestnut tree. And the rest is just repeating some of the other words. So, you know, fall in love, get married, have a family. There's a blacksmith for some reason yelling chestnut. This is a community now. Like, this is a really fun song that automatically gets into these themes of our connections to one another, our connections to ourselves, our communities, our, you know, our big, deep relationships, families. All this stuff is in this short little fun song that was so popular in 1939. So I made my students listen to it. As I said, I had them take, you know, quotes out of it and kind of try to make an argument. Why would George Orwell use this song? Why would he change it in such a way? Or what do you want to say about this, right? And so that was fun. And they got to say, like, well, it's the opposite, obviously. And they twisted something that was really good and turned it into something else. And that's what they're doing to the people. And that's what they're doing to the society. And, you know, good arguments. Good job, guys. And so I say clearly the chestnut tree in the song's vital, full of promise and growth. It spans forward into perpetuity. Family created via the love cemented in the song underscores the power and goodness of simple life, of marriage and love, and of the future that's bright when we're fruitful and united. By the way, it symbolizes also being an adult. When you're an adult, your sort of job is to create things for the future. You create children. You create a community of people who's supporting those children, and the culture they get passed down, the education they get passed down and go on into the future. This is an adult thing to do. In the book, on the other hand, Winston hates women, despises connection with them, he lusts for Julia only because she's a rebel against a system he hates even more than women. And ultimately, he betrays her to save himself because he's a crushed, weak, disconnected, and empty man. And I will emphasize here, he's a childish man. The chestnut tree in the book, therefore, is the life and future that cannot be once the party and Big Brother have found their foothold in the minds and hearts of mankind. I go on to the village blacksmith. I said, like me, then, you may wonder what inspired the Glenn Miller Band's use of the simple chestnut tree as a symbol for the unity and prosperity of the simple bonds of family and love. Like me, you may also enjoy knowing the predecessor of the song symbolism lies in a poem by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, written in 1840, almost a century prior to the song. Right? So right now we're here in 2025 and we barely are able to just grasp that, like, oh, George Orwell actually meant something about the chestnut. What is it? Oh my God, this song that was popular when he wrote this is now already almost 100 years old. And that song's based on a poem that's 100 years older than that. So here's this poem. Underneath a spreading chestnut tree, the village smithy stands. The smith, a mighty man is he with large and sinewy hands, and the muscles of his brawny arms are strong as iron bands. His hair is crisp and black and long, his face is like the tan, his brow is wet with honest sweat, he earns whatever he can, and looks the whole world in the face, for he owes not any man. Week in, week out, from morn till night, you hear his bellows blow. You can hear him swing his heavy sledge with measured beat and slow, like a sexton ringing the village bell. With the evening sun is low, and children coming home from school look in at the open door. They love to see the flaming forge and hear the bellows roar and catch the burning sparks that fly like chaff from a threshing floor. He goes on Sunday to the church and sits among his boys. He hears the parson pray and preach. He hears his daughter's voice singing in the village choir, and it makes his heart rejoice. It sounds to him like her mother's voice singing in paradise. He needs must think of her once more, how in the grave she lies, and with his hard, rough hands he wipes a tear out of his eyes. Toiling, rejoicing, sorrowing, onward through life he goes. Each morning sees some task begin, each evening sees it close. Something attempted, something done, he earned a night's repose. Thanks to thee, my worthy friend, for the lesson thou hast taught. Thus at the flaming forge of life our fortunes must be wrought. Thus on its sounding anvil shaped each burning deed and thought. The poem emphasizes, I say, the goodness inherent in working for your life, in not being a slave to any man, in recognizing your hardships as the consequences of the gifts of love and life, and in being satisfied with the simplicity of a life of creation and inner connection. There is community, but it is chosen and not forced. There's identity, but it is a byproduct of living a good life of self-responsibility, not adopted as a means of gaining status or proving virtue in a false social stratification. This poem is a perfect antithesis to the dark and twisted lack of humanity presented to us in 1984, where mankind has lost everything worth living for. And I'll emphasize again now how everything I just described that this poem is emphasizing is adulthood. It is adult to say, yeah, you know what, my wife died and that's horrible, but what a beautiful love we have, and how do I get to continue to produce and be a good member of society even despite that? I'm grateful for what I have anyways, right? I get to work hard and nobody gets to own me because I'm free, because I'm an adult. Because I'm an adult. And you're not free otherwise. And in 1984, no one is free because no one is an adult. And so George Orwell picked this on purpose, I should say, perfectly picked it on purpose because he's not stupid and it meant something. It's not an accident, right? This poem by Wadsworth is very simple and very beautiful and elegant, and it was so widely loved, so popular in our culture that 100 years later they wrote a big band orchestral song about it. Right? And I say, after reading this, From My Armchair is another poem. The story gets even better, I say, when you find out that Longfellow wrote The Village Blacksmith in part about a real chestnut tree in Cambridge, Massachusetts. When this very real and beloved tree was eventually cut down, school children took the tree and turned parts of it into a chair. They presented this gift to Longfellow, who then wrote the poem From My Armchair. And he says, am I a king that I should call my own this splendid ebon throne? Or by what reason or what right divine can I proclaim it mine? Only perhaps by right divine of song it may to me belong, only because the spreading chestnut tree of old was sung by me. Well, I remember it in all its prime, when in the summertime the affluent foliage of its branches made a cavern of cool shade. There by the blacksmith's forge beside the street, its blossoms white and sweet enticed the bees until it seemed alive and murmured like a hive. And when the winds of autumn with a shout tossed its great arms about, the shining chestnuts bursting from the sheath dropped to the ground beneath. And now some fragments of its branches bare, shaped as a stately chair, have by my hearthstone found a home at last, and whisper of the past. The Danish king could not in all his pride repel the ocean tide, but seated in this chair I can in rhyme roll back the tide of time. I see again, as one in vision sees, the blossoms and the bees, and hear the children's voices shout and call, and the brown chestnuts fall. I see the smithy with its fires aglow, I hear the bellows blow, and the shrill hammers on the anvil beat the iron white with heat. And thus, dear children, have ye made for me this day a jubilee, and to my more than 70 years and 10 brought back my youth again. The heart hath its own memory, like the mind, and in it are enshrined the precious keepsakes into which is wrought the giver's loving thought. Only your love and your remembrance could give life to this dead wood, and make these branches, leafless now so long, blossom again in song. And again, we have this beautiful ode to community, right? To memory, to the interconnectedness of people, and even nature in this case, right? To the changing tides of time that we go through, ups and downs and seasons of change, but we always have this connection to come back to. And this, again, it is unintentionally, perhaps, glorifying being an adult, right? Having lived a life of worth, having lived it in a way where it affected other people positively, getting to reap the rewards of a very simple presence and intention of living in connection with other people. And I say, can you imagine the interconnected but self-reliant community of thoughtfulness and love that brought all these pieces together? A blacksmith set up beneath a chestnut tree in a village connected through shared culture, self-respect, and mutual interdependence. The hard work, love, and loss of the blacksmith intertwined with the strength of a tree with deep roots and powerful sustenance to inspire a poet to capture the themes of life and death, struggle and success, love and loss, community and identity. The poem inspired a people and a culture much further out than the little town in which it was written, living on so long that school children then honored the poem decades later when the tree died. I say our roots are intertwined. Turning the tree into the chair to support the old man in the twilight of his life, the poet reflects on all the stages and moments that come through a life, like the seasons and years of a tree, to ripple out into eternity the power of a simple heart of man. The ripple traveled so far it inspired a song that caught the heart of a nation again a century later, echoing back so fully that no one questioned why in the song a random blacksmith shouts, otherwise nonsensically, "Chestnut!" When you're hearing that song, do you even stop to go, why did a blacksmith just yell chestnut? What does a blacksmith have to do with this lady getting married to this guy and that he proposed under a chestnut tree? Why is there even a blacksmith involved? But the people who knew that song knew this poem. 100 years had passed and they knew. 100 years had passed since, and I didn't even know the song that my grandma danced to. They knew a poem from 100 years before. They didn't lose their interconnectedness. We have. We've infantilized ourselves by rejecting everything that came before us and thinking we know better and can do it better. And there's nothing more childish than that. That's what kids do. Like, I'm going to run away. And you go, okay. And then you watch them walk up and sit in the top of the lawn for like an hour until they're like, oh, I'm hungry. I'm tired. I want my mom. And like, and then they come home because they don't know anything. This petulance, this whininess is our childishness that we have embraced and even enthroned and crowned and idolized in every possible conceivable way. This is the crowned and conquering child, right? I said, today we hear that song, cannot see why a blacksmith would even be around to shout anything and why. For the sake of love and celebrating a marriage, you might shout the name of a random nut. We have nearly lost the thread that connected the people of nearly 100 years ago to the people of nearly 100 years before that. In the book 1984, Orwell emphasizes exactly this disconnection. He highlights exactly this lack of memory. He underscores the dissonant way in which what we once held most dear cannot bring us back to our roots once we have chopped them down. He shows us how you can understand a dark vision of a dystopic political and social evil once it's laid out before you, but unless you can understand the heart of what allows it to thrive, you will suffer the fate of Winston and everyone else at the Chestnut Tree Cafe, ultimate defeat that you nonetheless created yourself. This is why the true message of 1984 is not to rail against communism, as every professor and teacher has said for 80 years. The ultimate intention is not to steer you away from a surveillance grid that sees and knows your every thought and move, even in your most private moments. The real heart and of the matter that Orwell wants you to hold on to is this: you are only as strong as your connection and commitment to your loved ones, your husband or wife, your children, your neighbors, and your countrymen. And once you give those up, you've given yourself up too. Every man and woman is weak. We are only strong together. And that is not a call to arms. It's not a call to organize into affinity groups or Antifa cells. It's a call to return to the roots that have made every town, every state, every nation strong all throughout human history: the family. Your future depends on it. A simple chestnut represents the abundance, prosperity, longevity, fertility, and hard work's payoff that all people used to work to create and celebrate together. May it represent the continuation of those energies within humanity's shared future so that we may all stand on strong roots, uncorruptible and without end. Amen. And I will point out, too, if you have ever gotten into communism, when I was a communist, one of the things that communists teach each other as, reinforce and encourage is the betrayal of everyone. I'm not even joking, even a slight or tiny bit. It's done without irony. It's done intentionally, and everyone's doing it. And it is this, that if you were brought in, for example, by the capitalist roaders after the Glorious Revolution, and they were going to torture your husband if you don't, betray the party, that you go ahead and let them. I don't know, is that right or wrong? It's up to you. But I'm saying this is the opposite, right? And in a communist system, you are going to intentionally betray anybody, or at least not hold your personal connections above the needs of the party. And this is the opposite. This is saying, actually, your commitment to your family, your culture, your tradition, your progeny, your ancestors, your community that lives right around you in this small little locale, that's what your commitment is to. That's what actually matters. That's what keeps you strong, and that's what keeps you alive. And when you've rejected all of history and all of the ways things used to be done and all of the people that came before you, you've already given all of yourself away to anything that will control you, which is, it could be communist, it could be a dystopian electronic AI nightmare, right? 15-minute city, trap. It could be any of those. It doesn't actually matter which one, because what it comes down to is you aren't an adult, and you have rejected adulthood. And so someone's going to take care of you and be your big brother. They're going to step in and take the place of that which should be controlling you, which is you. That's what adulthood is. You take care of you in every way possible, and then you take care of others too in the way that you can, because they're children. And that's adulthood. And that's what 1984 is actually about. And nobody actually ever gets to that point. And I'm the only person I've ever known who has taught that when teaching 1984. I'm the only person I've ever known that has taught that the point of the book is that we need each other and we need our connection to each other. And when we don't have that, we will fail. We need to be responsible to ourselves and adults, and then we need to keep our connections with each other, or else we've already failed. We don't need to go into the dystopia of 1984 to find out how badly. We already know that it just is failure. We have stopped growing. We have not transformed our harm into heal, and we failed. And no one they teach about communism, and they teach about, and they make it boring because it's also boring things to talk about. And people want to know about ourselves. We want to know about us. How do we do better? Is just how it should be. So the chestnut tree, the chestnut is in fact incredibly important. It's like the whole point of the whole book, and no one ever talks about it. So feel free to check out this article if you like it. Listen to the song. I highly encourage you to listen to the song. But it's not all doom and gloom, because as much as we have gotten deep into this age of the crowned and conquering child, and we are deeply narcissistic and deeply self-obsessed and deeply without connection to anything that matters, and darkly into infantilization that is so terrifyingly and disgustingly present. Even though that's all true, there is actually this big return to tradition. And remember, I'm not actually saying we need to go backwards. We don't need to return. If things have improved in various ways, keep those improvements, great. But what we need to do is stop being petulant children that whine and resist and reject becoming adults. We need to remember our roots and be connected to them and understand what's happened before us, right? And we need to learn from those people, our ancestors, and bring that forward into the future. And so part of that is a return to some of our tradition, some of it, right? And so I asked, is the U.S. Culturally experiencing a return to traditional ways? And this is the AI overview. There's other things we'll look in, but AI says, yeah, the U.S. is experiencing a return to tradition, particularly among young people, which can be seen in the growing popularity of traditional religious and lifestyle practices. Though this trend is complex and it coexists with a more individualistic cultural landscape, this return to tradition is driven by a desire for community and stability in an era of uncertainty and institutional mistrust. Manifestations include a resurgence of traditionalism within the church and trad communities, traditional communities, right? Trad wife, you hear a lot, traditional wife. And this is true. And so again, you don't actually have to go back to this certain version of religion, or, wives don't get to have jobs or be out in public or whatever. We don't need to do that to say it is actually valuable to have community. It is actually important to have community. And if that comes with the church, then it'll be with the church. That's great, right? It is actually valuable to have husbands and wives getting married and having kids and creating culture and community with, as they go. That's actually valuable. It's valuable to homeschool, which is another tradition that's coming back really powerfully. It's valuable to grow your own food, even if you're not subsistent or whatever, you're going to still need to buy things or trade things or whatever. It's valuable to have that experience, to have that as a backup in case other things fail, right? So we're going back to this understanding that a lot of traditions gave us freedom. It gave us independence, but interdependence too, right? And that we take these responsibilities and we do have standards for ourselves. And it is important to do these things, and that changes everything, actually. Now you are an adult. Right? And now you are healing yourself of the wounds of the past, and you're fixing this problem we have of disconnecting from our roots and being infantilized children in big bodies. I've also noticed, a lot of kids are like, I'm going to work out. I'm not going to eat unhealthy. I'm going to carry groceries for someone when I see that they need it. I'm going to be kind to people. I'm going to open doors. These are traditions too that we sort of lost and rejected, and now they're coming back. So, healthiness and being kind and having a respect for your culture and your society, this is coming back too. So I love this, and so we'll end here. This is from the Carolina Journal. It says how firm a foundation Gen Z turns to tradition amidst chaos. It says, for generations, American culture has presupposed that youth and tradition are fundamentally at odds. From Grease and Footloose to university protests and religious deconstruction, both media and conventional wisdom consistently portray tradition as the high-handed antagonist of youth. This perception carries some statistical backing, but recent trends suggest a shift. An increasing subset of Gen Z, those born from 1997 to 2012, have sought out more traditional religious affiliations and practices in droves. And when they get into this, what they mean by practices is having a family. Seriously, that's the practices they're talking about. Having a job, a career, and a family. So it's not just church. And like, I know people are so triggered by church, and this is one of the things I wish people could just get over, because we're not living in that age anymore. We're not in the age. Yeah, you can find a church that's full of hate and brimstone if you want, but if you're going to go survey 100 churches of any denomination, the vast majority of them are not going to be anything like that. They're like letting anybody, you can be gay, you can be whatever, and just come here. We just want to be together. So it's crazy that people are still so triggered by this thing. It's a deep wound, but you know what adults do? They fucking heal it. They see the wound and then they fucking heal it. Like, get over yourself. You're just in rejection to be in rejection. It's ridiculous. But have you made something better instead? If so, fantastic. Good. I have. I'm encouraging it. Do it. And if not, get over it. You transform it or create your own thing, but at least heal yourself. People have these like ridiculous rejections also of family. Just of having a family. And this is like a trigger for them. Oh, you just want me to be tied down. You just want me to have babies. I'm just a baby machine to you. Well, I don't care what you do. I think you're ridiculous for rejecting it outright and imagining that not having a baby is freedom. Get over yourself. There is nothing else humans are here to do but help and perpetuate one another and ourselves into the future and grow while doing it. Do you know what makes you grow more than almost anything else? Having a child. It makes you grow more than almost anything else you can do. It encourages you to grow. It can encourage you to fail too. If you're going to fail, you're going to fail. You'll go quite the opposite direction, but it will encourage you to become your best self, the best version of you can be, to confront some of the things you never even knew were there to confront, so that for the sake of your child, you'll do better. And this is what the future needs from you, is your best self. I'm like, have a kid or don't. But your automatic reactionary rejection of it is ridiculous. It's childlike, it's immature. Grow up. Put the things of childhood away. It's time to grow up. And again, it doesn't mean don't have fun. It doesn't mean, you never get to be a silly goose. It doesn't mean that you can't, go do something you wanted as a child and never do it. It means that at the same time, you hold yourself to standards. You have goals. You treat other people well as you can. Right? You heal the things within you that need healing. You face the things that scare you, even though they scare you, and you move through them, and that you do it with people. You do it in some kind of a connection with people. You understand where you came from and you respect it. You take what worked from the past and you utilize it and you pass it on. These are what adults do. And if we do this, we can get through the crowned and conquering child stage. We can get over the narcissism. We can have standards. We can hold each other to these standards. And we can also do it better than we've ever done it before. And then we can move into the next phase, which is supposedly the age of Ma'at, which means the age of truth, of awakening, of higher levels of self-understanding, of higher levels of self-actualization. And that is the goal of being alive. It's just, right? We want to get there, but it requires you and everyone you know, and me and everyone I know, to grow the fuck up. So let's do it. And until you do, travel well, aim for balance, and always look inside first.
Glued to their screens, friends, it's a plot to drop the IQ. Fighting amongst each other over rumors that don't like you. Prefer us trapped in melancholy with the wood ones, a holly suggestions that obliterate to camouflage the folly. Attempt a mental robbery, executed sloppily. The pop proceed is mockery and walk the talk with me. Put the hands up to touch the akasha, cause you know deep down there's something bigger than your wallet.